Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know? We don't know where you are going. We don't understand what you are saying. We don't understand what you are doing. But how can we know? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. It is fascinating to me as I begin to really explore the power of questions. I didn't realize that the rabbit hole was much deeper than I first initially thought. Some would argue that of the many conversations we find in the Gospels, stay with me, track with me, we'll go somewhere. Of the many questions we find in the Gospel, there are about 250 to 300, some would even say about 307 questions that Jesus asked, and maybe only about 3 that he actually answered. So throughout Jesus' ministry, he spent more time asking questions than giving answers. And we find ourselves today seeking more for answers than really asking questions. And when we really begin to understand how powerful questions are, it stretches us beyond ourselves. Notice in John 14, a passage that very often comes to us or comes across to us as somewhat of a funeral sermon, if you will. It's normally one of the references that people will give at a time of death or homegoing. But when you really are able to fully understand where John is going and what John is saying, its context originally goes much deeper beyond a lot of the shallow meanings that we deal with. And we've really been on a major journey throughout the Gospel of John this year, beginning to unpack and even look through and understand the different dimensions of how Jesus reveals himself in the Gospel of John. And it is easy to be around someone. Very easy to hang out with someone. Easy to share a meal, cup of coffee if you will. Get something warm to drink and chat, especially as the weather whether it goes back cold or hot, either way, you may want to get an icy, depending on one day this time of season, or you might want to go get a culotta, or sometimes the way the weather is, you want to go and just get a hot cup of coffee. It can swing either way, depending on the time of day. But either way, you can be around people for so long and think you know them, and then realize you really don't know them. And the disciples watched Jesus do so many amazing things, and they still did not know the essence of who he was. And now he's sharing with them about faith and about love. Let's look. He says to them in beginning of John chapter 14, verse 1, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. So he's beginning to unpack and allowing them to know. And then he says in chapter 13, verse 35, just the chapter before, a few verses up, remember, contextually, Scripture wasn't written in chapter and verse. That came 500-600 years ago. Originally, it was just one seamless story. All right, chapter and verse was to help us, but it wasn't meant for us to just catch versitis. All right, so originally 13 and 14 didn't exist. It was just one continuous stream of thought. So notice now in verse 35 it says, by this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. So he's allowing them to understand that before you really understand who I am, you've got to really know the love and the compassion that I have. Once you are able to fully understand the love and the compassion that I have, then you are really able to follow me. Notice, then he says, in verse number 36 at the end, because Peter asked him a question. It says, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered and said, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward. So notice, they are troubled. Around verse 14, that's why he says, let not your heart be troubled. They are troubled because they have a shaft of insight pierced into their hearts to know that there is another dimension of love they know they can't possess. They know they can't have. That there is a deeper layer, a deeper level of relationship that they have not yet tapped into. And it is very easy to allow ourselves to be the culprit of superficial Christianity or cosmetic Christianity or cosmetic things when it pertains to our faith, because we can easily get by when people ask us how we're doing and we give them cliche answers and all of that. But there is a deeper inner work that God desires to do in our lives that goes beyond the superficial, that goes beyond the things that we appear to be and the facade we put in front of people. And so he has to begin to establish to them that there are some things you still are missing. You've been around me, you've been listening to me, you've been hearing about me, and yet there is still a dimension to me you do not know. And for that he begins and says to them, don't let your heart be troubled. The mere fact that you believe gives you the ability to see beyond what others still cannot see. So he's really saying to them, first of all, I want you to have faith in me, and then I want you to love me. And that's when he begins to kind of share a little bit about in my Father's house are many dwelling places. Old translation says he imagines, but it's really dwelling places, because he's really trying to show them that where they are in him and with them is home. And I reflect a little bit when I think about the lostness of our society and how lost we are in everything, and how lost we are in all the things that are happening and going around. And yet, it is until we get to the heart of Jesus that we find ourselves home. And so, of all the things that Jesus does in the Gospels, he asks a lot of questions. I want to introduce you this morning to a few questions that have become my friends over the course of the last few years. When we really understand the power of questions, it was Richard Rohr who said something that was so powerful. I want you to just listen to this and just hear this. He said, answers give us more of a feeling of success and closure. Easy answers instead of hard questions allow us to try to change others instead of allowing God to change us. I want to say it again. Answers give us more of a feeling of success and closure. Easy answers instead of hard questions allow us to try to change others instead of allowing God to change us. So when we really begin to understand the power of a question, we've always referred to and has heard Thomas being referred to as Doubting Thomas. But again, as I argued last week, we want to really understand that Thomas is allowing himself to be vulnerable enough to expose the inner workings of how he's wrestling with what Jesus is saying. And if we're really honest, a lot of times we hear things, even in corporate worship experiences, that we sense things in our spirits, and yet when things happen around us, we're still not really clear as to what's really going on. And one thing we must understand is that in a season of intense hostility, in a time of intense turbulence, in a time of much uncertainty, it requires a bold faith on a unified front, which means that we have to be intentional about our unity. The Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians picks up on this and says that we are to earnestly or be eager to strive in the unity of the faith. That eagerness there requires an urgency. Everybody say urgency.
Urgency.
Whether you want to admit it or not, there is a sense of urgency in the earth right now. There is a sense of unrest in the season that we live in right now, in which many are trying to come to grips with all of the changes and all the switches and all the things that are happening simultaneously. And so the Apostle Paul picks up on this in the book of Romans, in which he allows us to understand that the earth is groaning, waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God.
Amen.
Which means that out of all the challenges, all the situations that are emerging in front of us, the answer to the problems of society is the people of God. But the people of God, who are supposed to be the ones empowered by the Spirit, are oftentimes seeing themselves as powerless. And notice Thomas says to him, I don't know where you're going, but how can I know the way? So questions, first of all, number one, questions birth insight. Questions birth insight. Questions birth insight. Jesus in Matthew 16 asks a question and says, whom do men say that I am? That insight led to the influence and the establishment of the church. But questions also bring intimacy. Questions also bring intimacy. In my entire life, I honestly couldn't tell you how many times I've been blessed to receive a compliment by someone about something. But I very rarely, over years, remember much compliments. I receive it in that moment and then it's gone. But I will never forget every time I've received a criticism. And I never forget every time I receive a thought-provoking question. Because questions birth insights and questions bring intimacy. You can tell the level and layer of thought in a person by the questions they ask. You ever want to really know or discern where someone's spirit is and where they are? Just look at the things they talk about. Because Proverbs tells us, as a man thinks, so is he. So if lust is in his heart, it'll come out of his mouth. Did you hear what I said?
Yep.
If deceit is in his heart, it'll come out of his mouth. If lying is in his heart, it will come out of his mouth. Whatever he's wrestling, whatever we wrestle, struggle, you will always begin to see it, even in the most subtle ways. I was sharing the other day with one of those who are connected to us on campus and all of that, and I said to him, the most dangerous thing about being in a new environment is you don't know who to trust. You don't know who to trust. Every time you enter a new season and you're in a new place, you don't know who to trust. And so you can't trust easily or casually. But if you pay attention long enough, the desires and the intent of those around you will reveal themselves over time. That's why I've always taken the Acts chapter 3 principle. Whenever something happens, whenever people ask me about questions about something new or a new idea or a new concept, there was a conversation in Acts chapter 3 and 4 specifically about some of the things that God was doing, and the Jerusalem church was having issues with it, and someone arose and said, if it be of God, it will show itself. But if it is not of God, it will surely fail.
Amen.
Number one way to really understand, to really see if something is really the move of God, or if God really led something, give it time. Give it time. Give it time. Give it time. I can't even tell you how many times, I probably have $1 million by now. Every time I told you somebody told me the Lord told them something. Number one way for me to see if the Lord really told it, to watch and see if it manifests.
Amen.
Are you with me?
Amen.
Because you want to make sure that if this is really of God, God will bless it.
That's right. That's right.
Are you with me, church?
Right.
Okay? So questions birth insight. I'm going to take my time with this. Questions birth insight. Questions bring intimacy. The disciples grew closer to Jesus by their questions. Lord, teach us to pray.
Yes.
We see you're doing something we want to do. Show us how you do it. And as a result, he begins to show them our Father. It's really the disciples' prayer. The Lord's prayer is in John 17 when he prayed that they might be one. So he gives them a model of prayer.
Yes.
Okay? Questions birth insights. Questions bring intimacy. And questions are instruments. Questions are instruments. Get this down. Questions are instruments. We give sometimes too fast of an answer to questions. Quick answers never change us. Slow answers do. Quick answers never change us. Slow answers do. And so we have to begin to wrestle with the questions. He looks at him and he says, I don't know where you're going. I recognize you're talking about all this stuff, but it's still not really clear to me what you are up to. And if you look very carefully, in context of society and all the shakings and things that are happening around us, sometimes it gets a bit frustrating, if we're really honest, because we know that God is in control. But that age-old question of theodicy, if God is good, why do we still see all the evil around us? Questions. Questions are also an invitation. Thank you, Holy Ghost. Questions are also an invitation. Questions are also an invitation. That's why I love God. Questions are also an invitation. It's an invitation to a conversation.
Amen.
It's an invitation to a conversation. Say this with me. Every new season begins with conversation. Say it again. Every new season begins with conversation. Questions are an invitation to a conversation. It's leading them somewhere. And Thomas, having close proximity with Jesus, is exposing not his doubt, because doubt is not the enemy of faith, it's the companion of faith. And we see this constantly revealed throughout the Gospels. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. In psychology, that is called cognitive dissonance. It really means that you see one thing, but you're challenged with that which you don't see. And this happens in all of our lives, whether we admit it or don't admit it. We see one thing happening, and yet we're still wrestling with something else. God, I know you have something better for me, but I see that this thing just happened here. I'm trying to figure out how this is going to work because everything is falling apart. I'm believing you for a breakthrough, but what I'm experiencing is a breakdown. We are trying to reason and trying to figure out. I know you're going somewhere, but how can I know the way? And Jesus says, I am the way.
Yes. My God.
I am the way, the truth, the life. You don't have to go anywhere.
My God. Hallelujah. Woo. Thank you, Jesus.
We spend so much time going to people.
Yes.
Are you hearing what I'm saying this morning?
Come on now.
We spend so much time trying to get an answer from people who don't know what to do.
My God. Jesus.
Jesus is trying to tell Thomas, hey, come here. You don't have to go anywhere. All that you need is in me.
Jesus. Thank you, Lord God.
So if I am the way,
My God.
and the way is I am, if you pursue me,
Hey, hallelujah.
you will see what's coming ahead of you.
Glory to God.
And we are so busy today pursuing answers from everybody else and everything else, getting our answers from people and memes and quotes and ideas and all kinds of stuff instead of getting in the face of God
Amen. Amen.
for ourselves.
That's right.
Distracted and bombarded by everything except Him. He's saying to them, only through Jesus do I find myself.
Hey, glory. Hallelujah.
Only through Jesus do I find myself. My identity doesn't come from anybody else. Most of the time, especially today, we think our identity is based on our image.
Amen.
So how good I look, how nice I look, is almost a segue to God blessing me. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Amen.
That couldn't be further from the truth. Your bank account does not define you.
That's right.
People don't define you.
That's right.
You are defined by who you are in God. And the most dangerous thing, and I really began to study this because I'm studying something right now. Whenever you look at forensic investigations, and we got some folks that love that stuff here, you'll find that they take time to assess the damages of a scene. And what I've been doing in my own personal and private studying lately, Brother Jameson, is I've been taking some time to go through and look over why things fail.
My God.
We are oftentimes obsessed today with success, but we rarely ever really wrestle with why things fail. And in the failure, you can really see a greater pattern than in success. And in one of the books I read many years ago called, I believe it was by Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall. Inside the book he talks about and says, the reason why great corporations fail is because of the undisciplined pursuit of more.
Amen.
I'll say it again. The undisciplined pursuit of more. Which means that they began to think in their minds that they never had enough. They never have enough. And so they have to get this, and they have to get that, and they have to get this, and they have to get that. And we all know people that are like that in our lives. They got this, they got that, they got this shirt, they got that shirt. They got this sneaker, they got that sneaker. They got this, and they have that. And they don't recognize and realize out of all of that, that does not define who you are.
Amen.
We are so image conscious that we've lost our identity because our identity is not in our image. Our identity is in Jesus. And when we look to him, he says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. You don't need to be discovered. Discover who I am.
My God. Hallelujah. Jesus. Amen.
Hallelujah. He says to him, oh, glory. Says to him, he says, everything you have it in me. And I don't know about you, but I'm so excited about it this morning because I don't have to worry about somebody trying to give me anything. Everything I have it in Christ. I don't have to worry about somebody trying to push me. I don't have to worry about somebody trying to give me something. I don't have to worry about somebody trying to do something. Everything I have it in Jesus. Lean over at somebody and tell them, everything I have it in Jesus. That's why we sang a song years ago, what a friend we have in Jesus. I understand that I don't have it in myself. I can't do it by myself. And that's what's going on with some of us in our lives this morning. You have finally come to the end of yourself. And God is asking, now will you trust me? Woo! Glory! You've come to the end of the stuff happening in your life. Everything is breaking down so that you can finally say, Lord, what are you saying? I trust you.
Yes, Lord.
Notice what happens. Thomas needs a way to put his pain in perspective.
Amen.
He needs a way to put his pain in perspective. And he's wrestling with trying to figure out how can this come together. Almost where I need to be. Notice what happens. He looks at him and says, I recognize you're doing something. I don't understand what you're doing, but I sense that something is happening. And what I want us to recognize and what I want us to understand is that even in seasons of uncertainty, we've got to be able to trust God even when we can't trace anything around us that can prove he's there.
Amen.
And that becomes challenging because you can pray, and sometimes you pray, and what happens is you are so weighed down by what you're going through. While you praying, you don't even believe the prayer can be answered. Tell the truth. Come on, somebody. You praying and you asking God to help a family member that you know ain't changing. Getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And the enemy is up there laughing saying, he ain't going to change. And so you're wrestling, trying to figure out, what am I doing wrong, instead of being able to follow the way. So one of the questions that I've wrestled with is, am I being driven by ambition? Or am I being led by the Spirit? It's one of the questions one of my friends I want to introduce you to as I close. Am I being driven by ambition? Or am I being led by the Spirit? It's one of the questions one of my friends I wrestle with every season of my life. Am I being driven by ambition? Or am I being led by the Spirit? Because when I'm driven by ambition, I chase success. But when I'm led by the Spirit, I pursue significance. When I am driven by ambition, I chase success. When I'm led by the Spirit, I pursue significance. Let's go a step deeper. Notice now, another question I wrestle with is, am I being faithful to what God called me to do? Am I being faithful to what God called me to do? This requires discernment. Because I can be doing something that might be going good, but it is not what God wants me to do. Remember years ago, Bishop Long would say something to us. He said, my biggest fear is not success. He said, my biggest fear is succeeding at the wrong thing.
That's right.
And so you have to begin to wonder, am I being faithful to what God has called me to do? And finally, the last question, who am I becoming? And who am I supposed to take with me? Who am I becoming? And who am I supposed to take with me? Why that question? Because in that question, you are able to gauge your growth.
Amen.
Your growth. Your growth. Growth is always intentional. And so in that question, you're able to really understand the essence of who you're called to be. He says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And he says, I am the way. You trying to figure out a way. You trying to make a way. And Jesus says, I am the way. You're trying to push your way and have your way. And Jesus says, I am the way. As I close this message, I reflect upon and I think about a little boy. Old preacher told us a story many years ago. A little boy that had been playing outside in the middle of the day. I guess that could be Columbus Day is the day that he's playing, since he would have the day off, and he's outside playing in the middle of the day. And as he's outside playing in the middle of the day, all of a sudden the sun begins to set. And as the sun begins to set, he had left the assigned area that he was supposed to be in. And so as the sun begins to set, it gets dark outside.
Yes.
And now he's lost trying to find his way.
My God.
And as it gets dark outside and he's trying to find where he should go, all of his friends have left him. And all he remembers is that right beside his house, once it gets dark, the only light in his neighborhood is at the top of the church steeple next to the house,
My Lord.
in which they have a cross that is brightly lit in the middle of the darkness.
Yes.
So the little boy goes down the street. He sees an old man hanging at the end of the street. And he looks at him and he says, "Sir, I have a question for you. Can you lead me to the cross?"
Wow.
The man looks back at him and says, "What do you mean, can I lead you to the cross?" The boy says, "Well, if you lead me to the cross,
Yes. Yes.
I will find my way home."
Yes.
It is not until he is able to see it
Jesus.
that he knows he's able to go home.
Yes. Amen.
We are living in a world today that is plagued with all kinds of darkness. Darkness at every scene and every twist and every turn.
Yes.
But when we lead the world to the cross,
Yes.
they will find their way home.
Amen.
As I close, very softly, as I close, I reflect upon something that happened to me about a week or two ago. And Sister Ann, Sister Russell now.
God bless you, my friend. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I pray that a word was spoken that transforms and changes your life. Please stay connected with us, www.globalfirenow.com. I'd love to hear from you.